Everybody. I'm Mark. This is Dumitru, and we're here to talk about ddlog in OVN. So the first question that probably needs to be answered is what? There we go. What is ddlog? Well, ddlog stands for differential data log. It is a programming language that has been developed by engineers at VMware. And one of the things that it offers for us that we don't currently have in OVN is a way of defining relations by transforming data from one relation to a second one. And it has automatic incremental behavior, which is something that we have worked hard to put into OVN controller, and that we want to have possibly throughout the rest of the code as well. As far as the details of the language go, it actually compiles into Rust, and it uses Rust for its standard library as well as any utility functions that it uses. So I mentioned that it uses incremental processing, which is great because ovn-northd right now doesn't do that. It always processes the entire northbound database and translates that into the southbound database. So as the scale goes up, it means that ovn-northd uses more and more CPU every iteration that it goes. So the question becomes, can we use ddlog instead of the current C version of ovn-northd? Well, the two of us here spent some time doing some ddlog stuff, and so we're here to share a couple of testimonials with you real quick. So I'm going to hand it off to Dumitru first to talk about his changes that he did in ddlog.
So the first developer story is about how we added IP multicast support, how we ported it to ddlog, so ovn-northd-ddlog. And I'm going to read this slide in reverse because it kind of makes more sense. So in the beginning, it was quite slow because it's a new language, it's a different paradigm. The documentation covers quite a lot of the topics, but some things are kind of hard to spot for a beginner of ddlog. And debugging is mainly offline, let's call it, because we need to analyze ddlog relation dumps. So you dump tables and you look at the outputs and then figure out where you made a mistake in the code. And then, but the thing is, we got quite a lot of support from the ddlog maintainers, and we had when we hit issues. And I came to realize that some things are way easier to implement in ddlog. For example, stable ID allocation was just a few lines in the end compared to complicated C code. And the thing that was really nice is that the resulting code is way more concise. So a simple basic metric I chose was the number of lines of code. It's a third in ddlog compared to C. And conclusion is that it kind of allowed me to focus on the functionality itself instead of how to implement.
Okay, so I had a slightly different experience with ddlog. So whereas Dumitru attempted to, there we go. So Dumitru attempted to port a feature that he had written in ddlog or in ovn-northd to ddlog. I took a different approach. I instead was looking at tests that were running with the ddlog version of ovn-northd, found one that was failing, and decided I'm going to patch that and make it work. And it happens to be that when I chose, the ddlog I actually ended up writing was pretty easy to do just by following tutorials for how the language worked. It just worked great. Unfortunately, the actual code that I ended up writing was way more Rust than ddlog, which is not what I was expecting to have to do. And because I was kind of making changes to the code and doing iterative testing with it, I had to sit through compile times that were 10 minutes plus every time I wanted to make a change. So that got a bit frustrating. And the unfortunate fact is that I actually didn't get my change submitted for a pull request because I was still running into problems at the end. A unit test was failing when ovn-northd would attempt to exit, And unfortunately, the way to debug that is to compile with this ovn-northd CLI option to replay what happens with ddlog. And I never got that to compile properly. So I'm still sort of in this position where once I get that working, I probably could debug it and get it submitted, but for now, it's kind of in limbo. So if you just want to talk about the language highlights and lowlights, aside from our personal stories. So the good thing is that what this language is designed to do is just translate data from one set to another. And when it comes to things like ovn-northd, that's basically what it does. The fact that it has automatic incremental updates is a big improvement over the current C code. Even with the incremental engine in OVN controller, you have to think very hard about how to iteratively make the code work, whereas the declarative nature of ddlog just makes it so you only think about the data translations, not necessarily the dependencies on because the language just works that out. And then there's some bonus aspects like the stronger type system as well as the safer memory usage than C. And the thing is, there is an ovn-northd version, and we have tested it, and it definitely does perform better than the C version right now. So the problems with ddlog are that maybe this is a bit of a harsh term, but we're calling it an unproven new language. And the big reason for that is just that there's just not a lot of projects that we know of that are using it out in the wild. So the fact is we'd be taking on something that, it's just a risk to take on in that regard. There's not much in the way of tooling for it, especially when it comes to live debugging. And the standard library was sort of, you can tell that it was sort of written basically as needed as opposed to being planned out. And also the fact that there's not a 1.0 version of the language sort of lends, more to the idea that the language isn't as mature or as, I don't want to call it stable, but it's not where we'd like for it to be. I've over time. Is that okay, Ben? Okay, sure. Okay. So the other challenges to conversion are, first of all, if you look just at the changes that happen in ovn-northd, they're happening all the time. So the idea is that it's a moving target. So conversion to ddlog is going to be quite difficult. And if we did implement ddlog ovn-northd in, if we actually committed it, then the question becomes, who does the porting of features from C to ddlog? Is it the contributors who contribute to C, or is it someone else who has to do it instead? And then there's also the fact that the ddlog uses a custom C code that kind of bypasses the current IDL and does its own custom stuff and has some edge cases that probably need to be addressed, but probably needs to be using the IDL instead, so that would require some more work. And then there's the question of whether ovn-northd is really the big target that we should go after, since OVN controller typically has more of an impact on people's performance than ovn-northd. Anyway, that's all for us. Thank you.